Now, I don't know about you, but I don't hear about people being like Bernard had a titty fetish. No one's saying that.
Oh my gosh, she's gonna strike me down, but Hildegard probably deserved it more.
Hi and welcome to my channel Explain. My name is EK and in this video I am proud to present an Explain First, an interview with none other than Lauren Cole, a medievalist and scholar of Hildegard of Bingen, as well as a TikTok creator who excels at mixing medievalism with pop culture. So to hear about Lauren's work on Hildegard and her interpretation of this medieval polymath, as well as a light-hearted discussion of medievalism and medieval women, stay tuned.
Please note that this video contains discussion of disordered eating and potential diagnoses of psychosis. I have the pleasure to introduce Lauren Cole, a PhD student at Northwestern University. However, long before she crossed the pond to follow her academic dreams, she was my best friend, and I'm so looking forward to hearing about her work on the medieval mystic and polymath Hildegard of Bingen. So, Lauren, to start us off, could you give us kind of like the too long didn't read of Hildegard and how you ended up focusing on her?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first, I just want to highlight that you said was my best friend. And
I'm
I
so
would like to think
excited.
that we are still best friends and that your channel needs to know about this slightly tenuous but still strong connection between us. So, Hildegard was born at the end of the 11th century and lived through most of the 12th century. She lived to be 81 years old. So, she saw most of a huge period of change, of reform, of renaissance in Western medieval Europe. Her big claim to fame is that she had visions from God, and I've actually got three visions as my background here. So this
Amazing.
was her vision of the universe, which is sometimes known as the cosmic egg, and some people, including myself, think it looks like a vagina.
Very Georgia O'Keeffe.
The vision of it is very Georgia O'Keeffe, like GCSE art,
Yeah.
yeah, but like next level GCSE art. So she had these visions from God, and through those she claimed immense divine authority, and that led to her having huge authority on earth. So she was then able to write all sorts of other different works. She wrote lots of letters advising popes and kings and emperors. She wrote the largest surviving corpus of medieval music. She wrote all sorts of medical and scientific texts. She wrote commentaries on biblical texts. And all this was during a time when officially women were not supposed to teach or preach. But because she derived her authority from God, it was like kind of a loophole in medieval Europe. It's actually not me speaking, it's God.
So what was Hildegard, when did you kind of first encounter her? Like, was it in your undergrad? Because I mean, I don't think we ever came across her at school.
Yeah, we sadly did not do any good medical stuff at school.
No, we didn't. It was all modern stuff the whole way through. We had about 5 minutes on the Reformation in year 9, and the rest of it.
Do you remember in year 7 we made a castle in Miss Haig's class? Do you remember that?
No.
It was like okay, it was like a real castle. It wasn't like bricks and mortar. It was like a paper. It was 2D on one of those giant A1 sheets of paper.
I'm so glad that you are like the repository of information. You are the Project Gutenberg of our friendship. I
Put
remember
that in.
none of this. The only thing I remember from Miss Hayes' class was learning about the Battle of Hastings, because we had to do our homework. We had to write a letter as if somebody had been at the battle and was like writing about it. And
Yeah.
obviously, tea stained mine. And then I was singeing the edges and it caught fire. Like it was consumed. Thankfully, I'd done it on the computer and it was like in like the old Gothic Baskerville font or whatever it is. And so I printed
Yeah.
a new one, was much more careful with my tea staining and my uh pyromaniac element. And Miss Haig had that on her wall until, because you remember she was in that classroom at the end, and when they moved
Yeah, I
it
do.
all,
Yeah,
she
yeah.
had it up until then, and that is my proudest achievement.
How did I get into Hildegard? So you're right, it was with Danny at school. So when I was in my undergrad, I took this course in I think it was in my second year, and it was called Women and Power in the Middle Ages. And I thought it was going to be about like queens, right? That's the only type of power I was aware of that women had in the Middle Ages. And it turned out to all be about religious women. And I was there, you know, having been raised like in an atheist background, thinking how, like, what does religion have to do with women and power? And I learned about Hildegard and a load of other female mystics who all derived this immense authority from their divine experiences or their mystical experiences. And I was like, I just did not even think that women could have this kind of authority and power in the Middle Ages, because the whole misconception is that, you know, women couldn't do anything, women couldn't even write, which we'll get into. I got very interested in her then, and really I've stuck with her ever since. I wrote my first paper on her back then in like 2014, and ever since I did my undergrad thesis, my master's thesis, and I'm doing my PhD dissertation all on Hildegard.
That is solid. That is brand continuity.
What can I say? Like, I knew that one day I would be a content creator, and I would need to have that in my back pocket.
I feel like for so many of us who end up getting into some element of like gender history, and that's kind of like the theory that you take, there's always like one woman who got you there. Like the
there's
woman,
always like your inspiration.
like I would say for me, and this is such a basic answer, but Anne Boleyn is like, because it's like she, you know, I was interested in her, and you know, we all hear like I would say she is, apart from Elizabeth II, probably like the most famous Queen of England. But then when I started studying history, it was like looking at her from a new angle, and then that made me interested in lots of stuff to do with women, and then also queenship. And you saying also about like power and authority, obviously a lot of the stuff that I looked at for my masters with queenship, it was all about them not having authority, like these queens not really having acceptable authority, but using power. Whereas it feels like Hildegard was able to sidestep that, like probably more effectively than lots of queens did.
Yeah, EK, didn't you write in your master's thesis, didn't you write about the difference between power and authority?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it's one of those things where it means different things to different people, but in queenship studies, one of the books that I read about it is, I think, just called Queenship in Medieval Europe by Theresa Earenfight. And the way she kind of divides it is as authority is the accepted, like that you're meant to be able to do these things. So the king, he's supposed to like lead the armies, and these are these like legitimate roles for him to have that queens didn't, but that power is more to do with influence and much more kind of not necessarily behind the scenes, but it can happen so informally. Whereas I feel like with a lot of the queenship stuff, authority is only formal stuff because it's about like leading armies and making laws, versus kind of having visions and stuff.
I feel like power is more of a like practical thing. You know, like you have the power to do, as I said, but authority is more that, like maybe people will come to you as an authority. Like the authority lives in the role more than in you. Like,
well, that's the thing. It's very easy for someone to have authority but not power, or vice versa. So like looking at king like Henry VI and stuff, he had the authority to be the king, but he wasn't able to fulfill that role, and so other people stepped in for him. Like I'm trying to think, I mean, there's definitely some kings and queens where both have kind of aligned, but I imagine that like in their lifetime, the times in which they had authority and which they had power didn't necessarily, you know, it was more of like a fluctuating thing, which is kind of what happened with Margaret Tudor and some of her more disastrous choices, which so Hildegard was obviously part of, as you said, with this kind of renaissance and this network of you could compare her to like other female mystics, etc. Are there any kind of notable figures that she is connected to, or both personally and in terms of letters?
Yeah, great question. So she left us hundreds of surviving letters, which I think actually is the largest surviving corpus of medieval letters as well. So we don't have all the letters, but we have a lot of the letters, and we also have a lot of the replies, so we can recreate a lot of the correspondence, which is super fun. One of the people that she was in contact with, which your viewers may know, is Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was the wife of Henry II. They wrote each other, what we have surviving are very short letters that are quite formulaic, kind of asking for blessing from Hildegard giving a blessing rather than necessarily giving a lot of advice. But there are suggestions that there were other letters going back and forth that haven't survived. And also political advice especially, may have gone orally via a messenger. So the letter itself would be like a formulaic thing that's like, I'm blessing you and I had a vision and everything, your life's going to be great. But the political message may have gone in secret or in private with a messenger, which is not something that we can recreate as historians, which is a shame, but sets the imagination on fire for sure, with Eleanor of Aquitaine and others. Another great letter that she wrote was to Frederick Barbarossa. Excuse me, what a terrible man. Caught in my throat. Frederick Barbarossa was the Holy Roman Emperor. So that is the emperor of, not of the the ancient Roman Empire, but of what is now like the German-speaking territories of Europe. It was called the Holy Roman Empire. So Frederick Barbarossa was one of the emperors who ruled when Hildegard was alive, and he was doing things politically that she was not vibing with. They were on different sides of this thing called the Gregorian Reform and the investiture crisis, which was when kings and emperors said we should get to choose and invest who the bishops are in our own land, and the church was like, no, sweetie, no, that's for us. So that was a big clash. Obviously, Hildegard was on the side of the church. Frederick Barbarossa was not. And so this was one of many kind of political things she did not agree with him on. So she wrote him this amazing letter in which she says to him, "You to me are like a child or like some madman." I mean, this is literally the emperor of where she lives. He could go in and have her killed. She says, I see you as some little boy or some little madman. It was amazing. And he actually did not retaliate against her. He really respected her as a visionary and as someone who had a direct line to God. And he actually subsequently did invite her to his court still to prophesize for him, to tell the future for him. So those I think are two of her really fun correspondences.
I'm getting the image, like if she was prophesying to him, being like, "God says you're a bitch." That's what I would say.
I mean, basically, because she uses divine authority a lot in her letters, where she's basically like, "Look, I called up the big man. He said this." And this time she called up the big man who said, "You're a little bitch," Frederick Barbarossa.
I actually got a quiz question right in a pub quiz about Frederick Barbarossa, and it was after I'd made one of my reels about me not liking military history, and someone
your classic,
and I got yelled at and stuff. And the quiz was, it was like, what is the name of I think it was now I'm going to get the military history a bit wrong, but I got it right on the night, so it doesn't matter. But it was like, what was the name of the attempted German invasion of Russia in World War II? And that it's also the name of a Holy Roman Emperor. And I was like, Barbarossa. And that was probably
you nailed it.
Proudest I have been of my knowledge. It was a good pub quiz, actually.
The haters need to watch this and be like, she actually is a military history queen. She knows it all.
I'm just like racing away from the truth. Oh my god!
I used to do that genre sometimes on my TikTok, of just like making jokes about military history being the worst, and people get so angry with me, as you know, because it happens to you as well. People get so angry with me and be like, "I can't believe you don't like people." They make it very personal. Like, "Can't believe you don't like people who do military history." Blah blah blah. I'm literally married to a military
Oh
historian.
yeah. Thoughts and prayers. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's not awesome press for me, but like, I don't hate people who do military history. I love one more than I love anyone else in the world. So no
I
offense,
think
CJ.
like my main beef with military history is that it feels quite inescapable as like in the history
Mm,
space. Military history, certainly in the UK, just seems to end up centered on like 20th century thing. Like I'll probably listen to someone about the
yeah.
30 Years' War or like the 100 Years' War.
Mm,
Basically, if you want me to care about
right.
war, it has to have chronology in the name, and then I will care. And I like maybe it is, maybe truly deep down I am a military historian because I'm really like I care a lot about the Battle of Bannockburn and like Robert the
Oh,
Bruce.
you do. Yeah.
What have you found has surprised you about Hildegard and kind of like the context in which she lived?
Probably the range of works um, that she created. We have quite a few different mystical and visionary and prophetic texts from medieval women, but we don't have so much medicine, and it's the medicine that I primarily research. And for a long time, it was thought that the medicine might be pseudo Hildegard, like not really Hildegard, because it doesn't appear in this giant manuscript that was made at the end of her life that contained all of her other works. But the reason for that is because that huge codex was made for with a view to her canonization. The medical works were not explicitly divinely inspired, so they're not going to support her becoming a saint. So they were left out of that. But we now have many, many manuscripts, including fragments, that prove that they are actually Hildegard's texts. But I think that the fact that she, in the 12th century, recorded theoretical and practical medical knowledge, which we just don't have a lot of, or haven't found a lot of yet from other medieval women, is the most surprising thing for me about Hildegard, and I think also surprising when I tell other people about her, that not only did she have all these visions, which we know a lot of from other women, but also that she composed these medical texts.
Mm. She's not like other girls. She's not just recording.
Yeah.
She has to be a
She's the
woman.
manic pixie dream girl of the 12th century.
Oh my gosh, she really is. What is the most kind of common or biggest misconception that people tend to have about Hildegard and kind of the environment in which she lived?
There are a lot of misconceptions about medieval Europe. My entire TikTok page is devoted to that. But specifically about Hildegard, I think the big one is that she, and I alluded to this earlier, the biggest misconception is that she didn't write her own works. We have an image of a vision where she receives, so she's receiving the vision and she's got a little wax tablet in front of her and she's literally writing down the vision. Right? So we know that she directly recorded her own visions on wax tablets. We also know that she had her own scriptorium, which is where manuscripts are made. She had her own scriptorium in her convent, and likely her nuns, very, very likely, her nuns were the ones who created these manuscripts. So she recorded it herself and then would have overseen the production of the manuscripts that we have surviving today. The reason this is such a kind of misconception is that a lot of medieval women, mystics and visionaries, had men write down, like their male confessors would write down their visions for them. So they would be kind of mediated. I'm actually writing about this at the moment, about how the issue of mediation. Are you writing about this?
I'm literally working on a script for my next YouTube video about medieval women and writing, and I'm talking about Margaret Paston and Marjorie Kemp, and how Margaret Paston, I think both of them, it's like it's not 100% clear, but they were both probably illiterate, and talking about how like Marjorie Kemp had, I think, 3 different scribes. Like that doesn't, we should still consider it as like women's writing, and there's
Yes.
which I have around here somewhere, on, it's called Medieval Women's Writing, which is, you know, not the most creative title, but I will forgive her. And it talks about having like women authored texts and women oriented texts.
Yeah,
commissioned or translated or read by or owned by.
Mhm.
Also, just complete aside, I read that. Did you read about Marjorie Kemp and stuff in your Mystics thing?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
I have always very much taken her work at face value, but Janina Ramirez basically not like implies, like she says it pretty explicitly, but she's characterizing it as like not her attention seeking, but that Marjorie was like wanted kind of to be famous. And that's why she had this whole kind of like, I'm gonna go on pilgrimage for 4,000 years. And I was like, it's a little bit shady. Like I see the argument. I see it, but I was a little bit like,
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that because I feel like of all the female mystics, Marjorie is the one where people are like, she was a fake. She wanted attention and she wanted to be famous.
now that I know this, I now have to care and like be part of like the Marjorie Kemp fucking defense. What is your view on the kind of attempts, most of them pretty recent, but the attempts to kind of discover the medical or scientific explanations behind Hildegard's experiences? So one of the common ones you see is that her visions were the result of migraines. What's your kind of take on that?
I have a strong take on this, and I really disagree with them. And I'll explain why. So the context of this is that I think it was in 1908, the early 20th century, Charles Singer, who was a doctor, diagnosed Hildegard as suffering from migraines by reading her visions and looking at the images of her visions. So he thought that she was experiencing like aural migraines, so having auras, and that has entered the popular imagination, certainly, to explain why Hildegard said that she had visions, right? I think that we always try and approach historical figures and their experiences from our own context and from our own terms, and we try and find ways to understand them that relate to our own experiences. In terms of the medical stuff, though, I think it really is dismissive of Hildegard's visionary experiences to say, well, what she was having, she couldn't possibly understand. But now we've moved on so far and progressed so much, we can now understand what they were, despite the fact that all we have left of them is some reports. We weren't there, we didn't see her have the visions. So I think it's dodgy from a historical perspective. I also think it's dodgy from a medical perspective, because how can you diagnose without seeing enough? It's a poor diagnosis medically, and I think it's poor historical practice as well. And I think the tendency here is to pathologize medieval women, and that there's a lot of misogyny tied up in that. So not only that the visions couldn't possibly be real, well, that may well be your belief, but I think we should take her at face value. So Marjorie Kemp was often called hysteric or viewed as hysterical in the 20th century because she cried a lot. And so a form of her expression of her devotion, which was perceived as annoying even in her own time, we then rewrote that as hysterical in the 20th century. Now in the 21st century, we would not call a woman hysterical. So even medical diagnoses change over time. Right, they're not a static thing. So what they thought they knew in the 20th century, in the 21st century, we're going to revisit that. So I think to write off visionary experience as a with medical reasons, like a migraine, is really just a product of our own time and our own culture, and is not the objective truth or like objective approach that we think it is.
Did she, like, specifically in the visions where people are like, oh, because she talks about like a beam of light, etc.
Yeah.
Does she mention in those visions pain?
Oh, that's a good question. In the majority of her visions where she says like, and I saw in the living light, blah, 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 and I heard through the living light, blah, 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 she doesn't mention pain. But at the beginning of her first work, which is called the Scivias, or the Shivias, if you use ecclesiastical pronunciation, in her prologue, she's like, I was struck with a huge illness because I refused to report on my visions. Like God said that I had to tell people, and I was too scared to tell people, and so He struck me down with a divine illness. So in that, there is certainly like a sense of illness, suffering, pain. But in the like kind of quotidian vision reports, there is not that sense of pain.
See, and that's the thing, like, I'm no government scientist, but I've had a few migraines. If you had the, like, because I've had, like, with the oral stuff, and if you had that and didn't have, like, I just can't imagine you having that without having pain if it wasn't. And like pain becomes, like, there's other symptoms as well, but like pain is the main thing. Like, I would just expect her to especially if, like you said, she mentioned how, like, experiencing pain and illness, perhaps that would be something she continued to experience for a lot of pain. Why would she, like, keep that to one side? So
yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think that it would be much more prescient in her texts, and also because she is anti-aestheticism. So, you know, a lot of other female mystics, mostly slightly later than Hildegard, but it's starting in her lifetime, like her contemporary Elizabeth show now. Hildegard wrote a letter to Elizabeth saying, like, you need to live a balanced lifestyle and not live an ascetic lifestyle because it's bad for you and it's not what God wants, etc. So I think that she would have, had she suffered consistent migraine pain, I think she would absolutely have spoken about that in the context of God making her live an ascetic lifestyle, but she actually didn't think an ascetic lifestyle was a good thing. So I think that tension, she would have wrangled with that tension somewhere in her works.
So basically, Hildegard of Bingen invented body positivity by being like,
right,
don't be doing this extreme fasting.
And that's what her medical works are all about, right? They're all about balance. So they're like, you know, don't eat too much red meat and don't drink too much wine and, you know, blah, 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 and get enough sleep and don't work too hard. And then if you're very young or very old, you can have lots of meat because you need it for your strength, blah, blah, blah. So she's absolutely big on body positivity. And then not hurting yourself and actually properly looking after your body. She's not Catherine of Siena, right? Catherine of Siena quite literally starved herself to death.
Yeah.
When she was, I think she was 33 because everyone was like, oh, just like Jesus. Wow. She's not like a Catherine of Siena. She absolutely is very pro-balance in her theology and in her medicine.
Yeah. It's interesting you saying as well about how like women's visions being dismissed. The main saints that I think of as having their visions dismissed in that way, where it happened a long time ago, is Hildegard of Bingen and Joan of Arc. Like, a lot of stuff, and you just hear it, and it's almost become, obviously not necessarily in like real scholarly circles, but in kind of pop culture stuff, you hear about Joan of Arc and these are all the things she did, and then it's almost a given that it's like, okay, well, was she schizophrenic? What was she experiencing psychosis?
Right.
And we don't tend to get that necessarily, that I can think of from any kind of male saints.
You know, Bernard of Clairvaux is a big one who kind of kicks off the mysticism movement of the Central and later Middle Ages. And I never hear anything about him having some kind of medical condition. I mean, he had do you know what? I don't know if this was a vision or if this was just a story about him. Have you heard of the lactation of Bernard?
It rings a bell. But to be fair, there was like a lot of lactation going around in terms of saintliness. But
yeah, this is true. So I think he had a vision, or this was a story about him. I'm not 100% sure. Basically, he was conversing with the Virgin Mary in like a mystical state, and she got her breast out and squirted milk into his mouth, and it was like a mystical experience. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't hear about people being like, Bernard had a titty fetish. You know, no one's saying that.
Maybe they should be. Maybe they should be.
But if we are saying that Hildegard had migraines and that Marjorie Pent was hysteric, we need to say that Bernard Clairvaux had a titty fetish. I'm sorry.
You're so brave for saying the things that need to be said. Why are you booing her? She's right. So we talk a lot about, well, we just talk a lot, but more generally, we talk a lot about the influences that kind of shape medieval existence. So kind of piety and religiosity, the institutions of the church and the crown, and then feudalism. What do you think future historians will say shaped ours?
It's a great question. I think there's two obvious ones: capitalism and colonialism slash
Mm.
post-colonialism are going to be, I think, the two huge ones, which historians obviously already are talking about in the present. But I think when if let's say, okay, so Hildegard lived like 800 years ago. So in 800 years, when everything's changed, I think they're gonna, if there still is a planet, climate crisis. But anyway, if there still is a planet and there's still historians, they're gonna look back like us and they're gonna be like, why did they work themselves to death under capitalism? Why did they do that? That was strange. I think that's going to be a big one. Colonialism and post-colonialism, I think, speaks for itself as a huge thing that will be looked back on as a massive influence over everything. And I think, even in medieval studies, we're starting to see that come through as people are questioning why the field is so focused on just Europe, and not even just Europe, but just Western Europe.
Yeah.
So we're now starting to see more research being done on like a global Middle Ages, that then again is exporting the idea of a Middle Ages, which is a specific European context, is exporting that globally, also a form of post-colonialism.
Yeah, in my global Renaissance class, the conclusion I came to in my essay was like this idea of, oh, well, this country had a Renaissance and, Asia had a Renaissance. And my kind of vibe was, you don't need one. Like nobody
Mm-hmm.
needs a Renaissance.
Yes.
And the kind of case study I used was Scotland, because I was in Scotland and obviously like study medieval Scotland. How many times can I say Scotland without dying?
Oh,
Without Nicola Sturgeon gonna like appear behind.
Now she's resigned. That's her main job now.
The other thing I think that historians will look back on is kind of like the digital revolution, and that being into like the print revolution and stuff in Western Europe.
For sure. Another one I think will be like how we try to become secular.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
and how, because most of European history anyway, prior to now, has been very, very shaped by religion. And now I think we like to pretend,
Mhm.
especially in the UK and Europe, that we're no longer so shaped by religion, like post French Revolution, blah, 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 and separation of church and state. I like to think that we pretend that we're not so influenced by religion, but we actually really, really are so influenced by religion culturally, but also like I think we've displaced a lot of religious activity into other things. And one of my big things, and this is going to sound like a conspiracy theory, but I promise there is academic research on this in religious studies, which is super interesting, is how since the US has tried to become more secular, whether that's been successful or not, whatever, that's when we get the rise of alien sightings. And I think, no, for real though, for real. Like
People are looking for something.
People are looking for something. Exactly. It's like that kind of like post World War II moment in which people are like scrambling for meaning and they can no longer find it in the religion of yore, and so they're turning to other things. Like there have to be other powers, and there have to be other things, and they are out there in the wider universe.
That's fair. It's very American, but it's fair. It's like, I feel like in, as you said, kind of Western Europe, but specifically in the UK, there's been kind of popular religion and like authority, the church, or kind of religious like hegemony or whatever. I never know whether to say hegemony or hegemony.
Hegemony.
But yeah, that.
Yeah.
And then I feel like we've lost the popular religion, but not lost the more kind of like overarching stuff. And as a result, the generally people are not able to recognise what isn't the result of that religious kind of overarching.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and it's like we're still doing Guy Fawkes Night, but the anti-Catholic element of that, I think, in much of England has been forgotten.
I would imagine
In places where there's like sectarian conflict still, then absolutely, like that's still very recognised and present within that. But I certainly think, like, at least in the area where we're from, people are like,
I would imagine there are a lot
forgotten.
of people in England who don't know that England used to be Catholic.
Oh god, yeah, for sure. It happens to me all the time when I'm talking about like pre-Reformation England, and people are like, "Wait, that sounds Catholic." Your perception of a country is like, well, for the last 500 years, it's been a Protestant country, or well, Anglican, which is like in the middle. Then you're not. It is going to be a shock.
Yeah.
I also think another thing in the like desire or like the way that we fool ourselves into thinking that we're being secular, another symptom of that is like the rise in interest in ghosts and mediums and wanting to like speak with the other side. The other things that we think we're so far removed from religion and we think we're so secular, and yet so much, at least in the UK, so often people will say everything happens for a reason. And that is quite literally Reformation rhetoric on predestination. Like, that's what that is. That's just fully what that is. And so when people are like, everything happens for a reason in a completely secular way, that's a huge influence of religion that is just being
John
missed.
Knox just if you say everything happens for a reason 3 times in a mirror, John Knox is 100,000 you for something. All I know about John Knox is just him being a dick to people. Like, I don't know what his actual like theological thoughts were. I just know that he was dumb as a rock, because literally all he had to do when Mary Tudor was like Mary the First, all he had to do was attack her for being Catholic, because he knew like it became increasingly obvious that Elizabeth was going to like succeed her. All John Knox had to do was say, "I hate Catholics." That was it. But no, he was like, do you know what? I hate Catholics and women. And then, of course, when Elizabeth comes to the throne, she's like, get fucked. Absolutely not. So I'm just like, the most short-sighted.
Truly, misogyny will win out.
I know, like, zero self-preservation.
Over self-preservation. Misogyny is stronger than self-preservation.
Right, quick interruption to your regularly scheduled, etc., etc. I just want to clarify what I mean here. John Knox's hatred of Catholics was as shitty as his misogyny, but my point that I'm making is that in terms of his own interests, which were the aggressive promotion of Protestantism, Knox massively shot himself in the foot by also coming out swinging against women, particularly, well, mainly queens regnant, because he was criticising Mary Tudor, Mary the First of England, constantly, and if he had just criticised her for being Catholic, then he might have done well after Mary's death and the succession of her half-sister Elizabeth, because Knox and Elizabeth were both Protestant. He might have had a place in an Elizabeth's court or had some kind of influence in the creation of like the Elizabethan church, but because his misogyny was just so fervent and so aggressive, he completely sabotaged his own interests. So yes, the hyperbole here is directed at how short-sighted John Knox was, and how he just completely shot himself in the foot. Right, as you were.
Do you know what? There is the film with Saoirse Ronan and Margot Robbie of Margot Robbie, and do you know, and everyone's like, "Oh, have you watched it? You watched it? You must have watched it." I haven't watched it, and I say to people, "Oh, I didn't watch it when it came out because I was still studying like Scottish history. I was doing stuff on American Scots, and I didn't want it to kind of, influence me." And that was a lie. Do you know why I won't watch that film?
Why?
John Knox is played by David Tennant. And my body will betray me. I don't know if he's any good. Like, he definitely wasn't like billed as like, oh, he gives an amazing performance. I have no idea, and probably will never be able to safely know. Maybe on my deathbed, I'll be like,
you can't accidentally fall in love with John Knox because he's played by David Tennant.
I know.
Okay, I'm back again, briefly. I was looking up a picture of David Tennant as John Knox to illustrate this point, and I need to recant the fear that I expressed in this video as, God bless David Tennant, there is zero risk of me falling in love with John Knox via David Tennant, because in the film, the 2018 film with Margot Robbie and Saoirse Ronan, this is what he looks like. Okay.
This question is given a little bit of homework to anybody watching. Do you have any kind of good introductory text that you would recommend, either on Hildegard or on kind of like the general field, whether that's kind of like female mysticism or more kind of like medieval medical stuff, or just kind of more generally to medieval religion?
So for Hildegard, the introductory text that I tend to recommend is by Sabina Flanagan. It's called Hildegard of Bingen. It's like the main title, and the subtitle is like Her Visionary World or something. But Sabina Flanagan, that's who wrote it. I think she actually published this in like 1989. I still tend to recommend it as the best introductory overview. While there has been additional research on various bits and pieces in that, it still gives, I think, the most accessible general introduction to Hildegard. So I really recommend that. But also, all of Hildegard's works are now in English, right? They're all published in English. So there is no substitute for actually just reading her works themselves and getting close to her and enjoying those and seeing what you get out of them. Which one would I say to do first? You probably could go in like chronological order of her life. So you could start with Scipias, which was her first visionary text. But there are also lots of her letters are available online for free. Her medical texts have been translated and they're very reasonable to buy. They're like, I don't know, less than $20 per book, or less than £20. I think let me extend an invitation that if anyone wants to send me their introductory texts or their popular texts on these, then I will have an answer to this question for you in the future.
In kind of popular works that although I suppose a lot of my stuff is on queens and things, but in the Janina Ramirez book, Femina, it's like the egg is the front cover, and she talks about Hildegard, and she also talks about, she talks about Marjorie Kemp. She doesn't talk about Julian of Norwich much, but I will be linking to this in the medieval women writing video. She did a series, I think it was two episodes, or it could have just been one, called like The Lost Manuscript of Julian of Norwich. And it was basically about how this will crack you up. You know how like manuscripts very often have like, it will be called like the Oxford, the Bodleian, MS57, and all the like the ones to do with St Margaret. There, a lot of them are in the British Library, and it's like Cotton Tiberius III is the name of it.
Yeah.
Julian of Norwich, one of the manuscripts is S and one is L. Do you know what those stand for?
Short and long.
Yeah. I was like, that's incredible. But yeah, and so it was talking about how, I think it was the long version, was it kind of turned up in some nuns that were from originally an English Benedictine community but had moved to France, and it had kind of, I think they still have like the original manuscript that ended up kind of surviving, but I don't think, possibly because she did that documentary, she doesn't mention it much in the book. But I cannot really think of any other places where I've read about Hildegard. Probably you were the first person who told me about her, so thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think like her popularity is different in different places and different countries. Like here in the US, she's well known for her music, and she's often on introductory music courses. But also, that's because it's specifically a liberal arts education at the universities here. Like all the undergrads, they have requirements to do certain courses in the humanities. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people will do like an introduction to music history, even if they're studying engineering or whatever. Yeah. And they'll learn about Hildegard from that. So she is well known here as a composer, which I think is interesting. I think that's definitely not the case so much in the UK.
Yeah, no, I don't think, like, music stuff fascinates me because there's so many of like the sensory experiences that we that haven't survived. So like we really don't have much clothing from the medieval period,
Yeah.
or even like
Yeah.
food, probably for good reason. I don't know if I'd want to be eating like a 15th century bread roll. But music, and then obviously we have like buildings and art. But even with art
Mm,
and buildings, they've always changed. That
mm,
with art, it's either has been restored or it has aged like significantly. Same with manuscripts. Whereas, if the music is there, it can be put into something. And so, like, I don't know if it's all of it, but certainly everything I could find on Apple Music, which I only use because after 4 years of being a student, Spotify doesn't give you the student discount anymore, and I point blank
rude. Very rude.
$9.99 a month. Absolutely not. So
Outrageous.
I know I have like as many that I could find of Hildegard's music, and yeah, it's just amazing to be thinking that this is how it would have sounded to her. Like we're having the same experience. So I love.
Wow. It actually is not how it would have sounded to her. With all medieval music, we actually don't have enough information to be able to recreate it as it would have actually sounded.
Ah,
So, because I'm not a government musician,
yeah.
right? No, I'm not a musicologist. I did take a class on medieval music, which was very interesting, where I learned all this. But we don't. We basically there is not enough information left in the manuscripts for us to recreate it as it would have sounded then.
Yeah.
However, because Hildegard and others did use staffs, like
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
put musical notation on, we do know what the notes are, but we don't know things like pitch and tempo and all these other things.
Also,
Again, not a musicologist, probably ruining all the terms there. But yeah, so we can't recreate it as it would have exactly sounded. So that actually everything we hear from medieval music is an interpretation, and there's lots of different ways of doing that. And to go back to when we were talking about how colonialism and post-colonialism will be like one of the big things that historians will look at as an influence on us today, a lot of medieval music in the 20th century was recorded in the style of Moroccan and other North African um, sounds, because it was thought that at the time, and this is a very colonial attitude, they thought that people there were playing the same kinds of music that had been played,
mm,
1,000 years ago. So then they decided to record like Western European medieval music in that style, and we still hear a lot of that today, which is super interesting. But most of the Hildegard recordings that we hear now are in a kind of very classical Gregorian chant
yeah.
style, which we then associate a lot with it. But we actually do not know how it would have sounded exactly.
But there we go. Right, I have one more serious question. It's not really serious, and then
Okay.
I have some fun ones. Okay, so last serious one. What do you think that Hildegard would think about her legacy, and would parts of it surprise her?
That's a great question. I think that the main thing that would surprise her is that she did not become a saint until 2012. And I
Oh,
think she would be really pissed off about that fact. So, as I mentioned earlier, they compiled at the end of her life, or just shortly after she died, they compiled all of her works, except the medical texts, into one giant codex with a view to getting her canonized, aka becoming a saint. But it just never happened. Like there just wasn't enough momentum and interest, and it does take a long time for canonization process anyway. So it was begun back then, but it was not actually finalized until like 800 years later or whatever. I'm not a mathematician, but in 2012.
mm,
So I think that she would be really surprised and disappointed that she did not become a saint for that long. But when she was made a saint, she was also made a doctor of the church. And there are only 4 women doctors of the church. So I think that she would be really pleased about that, even though it took a long time that she was counted within that number.
that was a question on University Challenge a while ago. It was talking about Catherine of Siena, and it said that
Yeah.
Catherine of Siena is one of the few female doctors of the church. Name another one. And I was like, this is
Oh
my
my gosh.
St Margaret didn't get canonized, so she died in 1093, 1,000 years before our birth, and was canonized in, sometimes it's said as 1250, sometimes 1249. I think it was 12. I think like they're not sure like when the paperwork came back. But I think like, no offense to St Margaret, but if St Margaret hadn't been like a dynastic saint, I don't know if that would have happened, because like, oh my god, she's gonna strike me down, but like,
Gotta watch out.
Hildegard probably deserved it more. So
Ooh,
I know.
controversial scenes on the channel today.
She has one like pre-mortem miracle. She dropped a book in the river, and then when they went and picked up the book, it was intact, like it wasn't wet, and they were like, "This is that's not a miracle."
It's not hugely exciting, is it? It's not the sexiest miracle I've ever heard.
Exactly. She wasn't squirting no titty milk into Bernard's mouth, okay? And if she had, I would have said fair enough. But yeah, I think
you should do a video on the most interesting and exciting saints miracles,
and the least interesting. That's
and the least, yeah. You should pair them together.
Stuff about saints is so wild, because I will never get over reading about Saint Sebastian, who literally was martyred by being tied to a tree and like pierced with 1,000 arrows. And what did they make him the patron saint of? Archers. The disrespect. Hildegard was, maybe she had the right idea. She was like, I ain't getting involved in this. I will stay non-saintly. Because
what she's the patron saint of, actually. Do you know what? I'm going to look it up right now.
St Margaret isn't the patron saint of anything. St Margaret is the patron saint of Scotland, or one of them. I'm talking about when it's like, oh, they're the patron saint of like cobblers, or you know, half moons, or people who have stubbed their toes on Thursdays. And Margaret, she's none of them. Like sometimes people will say, oh, she was the patron saint of childbirth, but she's not. It's just that some of her relics, or one relic specifically, her shirt was used by Margaret Tudor, and also I think by Mary of Guelders when they were having like a baby. But
that's classic.
Well, I think it's not necessarily to do with like the giving birth. It's more to do about like having an heir to her dynasty type thing.
Yeah. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, Hildegard is considered a patron saint of musicians and writers.
Oh, that's cool.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fine. We'll accept that.
Saint Sebastian saw that happen and was like, "Are you joking? Writers and music." Bless her. Right, now we have the fun one. If Hildegard didn't exist, who would you study? I know.
Oh my goodness. Well, okay, I actually do have an answer for this. When I first got interested in Hildegard, I wanted to study Elizabeth of Schonau, who was her younger contemporary. But I didn't, because my university library did not have her texts. And I was a baby medievalist, and I didn't know about interlibrary loans. So I then went and studied Hildegard instead and started this long journey. So I think I would have started off with Elizabeth of Schonau, but because she didn't have so many works, I think that I probably wouldn't have created my brand of Hildegard over all these years. I think that I would have then mixed and matched different medieval women mystics, but I always think I would have done medieval women.
Yeah. Always. Oh yeah. Oh my god, 100%. There's it's from Little Women, and there's a gif of Saoirse Ronan, and I have no interest in reading or watching Little Women, but I don't know why. I guess I'm just a hater. But she's just going, women, and whenever people are like, "What do you study?" I'm just like,
women.
That's it. I don't know where it's gonna go after that, but that would, like, whenever people were like, "Oh, what are you gonna do your dissertation on?" That was much it.
I do actually have another interest, which is not medieval.
I don't believe this.
Which I sometimes read and write about, which is actually, I don't know if I can even bring myself to say it in front of you, because I think you're going to disown me and end this friendship. It's not military. It is 20th century though. I am really interested in post-World War II social housing architecture.
I think I did know this because you're the only
Yeah,
person
okay,
who
yes.
cares about brutalism. If I'm allowed Bannockburn, you're allowed this.
Right.
You know
We all have one weakness.
exactly.
We all have a chink in our armor.
Yeah, I probably would shag Robert the Bruce as well. Right, next question. Who
Okay.
would you cast to play Hildegard in her biopic?
Okay, so Hildegard started writing her first work when she was 42.
Hmm.
So she did everything that she did in the second half of her life, like between 42 and 81. Okay. So, and it took her 10 years to write her first text. So most of the Hildegard that we know is an older woman. So I might go for like a Maggie Smith.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. It should be someone German though.
I think there
You
is.
think?
I was looking something up about it, and there is like a German language biopic, but
Yeah.
it
There are
looks
some films.
it looks a little bit depressing. Like
Oh.
I don't necessarily want her to have like a big, American blockbuster style one. Like, do you know who Americans would cast to play her? Gina Davis. That's just the vibe I
Oh
get.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think
like
that's quite a good shout actually.
I
Or
think
she could be like a Helen Mirren maybe.
or potentially if you were gonna do it like her and the younger end and then age her up, like with makeup, Nicole Kidman.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because she can play a range.
I don't know who would play St. Margaret. St. Margaret didn't seem like a lot of fun. Whereas I feel like Hildegard,
Shame.
I feel like her Sal would have had a good vibe.
Oh yeah, big time. Well, she's composing music in there.
Yeah, whereas St. Margaret lived in a cave occasionally, and it's like, I
It's
don't
not the
know,
vibe. I would rather be in a cell having a sing song than living in a cave on my own.
a cave in Scotland.
It's all
Absolutely
no.
not. Absolutely not. Okay, this is a good question. I don't know if you'll have an answer for this. There might be too much.
Ooh, okay.
I think Hildegard benefits from having a lot of stuff available. What would be your Richard III discovery?
For me, it would be the original manuscripts of the medicine because we have the original, well, not necessarily the original, but we have a manuscript from Hildegard's lifetime or immediately after she died of all of her other texts, right? And I think that's why she ends up being so well known, is because we have all this reliable stuff. But as I mentioned a couple of times, like we don't have the medical texts in that same massive codex. So that would be like my dream discovery would be to find those. I'm not planning on it because I don't think they exist anymore, sadly. All her works went to Dresden in World War II. A lot of stuff went to what was then the USSR after World War II. And a lot of stuff, has been sold off, especially into the US and gone into private collections in terms of medieval manuscripts. So I don't think it's going to happen, but that would be my dream in life.
If you could ask Hildegard something, what would it be?
I know I'm a one-trick pony, but it would be about the medicine. I would ask her, how did you record the medicine? Or I would ask her, how did you know medicine? How did you read books of theoretical medicine? Yeah. Did you practice? Like, that's what my PhD dissertation is on. So I would just ask her that and then write the one sentence that she says.
Yeah.
And the citation would be, Hildegard of Bingen revealed this to me in a dream.
Exactly. It's so efficient.
And then I would submit that to my advisor.
Yeah. No, you need to wait until the end of just do nothing for the next however many years and then be like, here it is. This is what I've been working on.
I'll take the sweet funding money and be like, here's one sentence in return.
Okay, the next question, I think I know the answer. What is your favourite image or illustration of hers and her work?
This is, as I mentioned earlier, her vision of the universe.
It's beautiful.
Also known as the cosmic egg, and I think it really does have a very vaginal sense to it.
Yeah. Like, all of her stuff is cool, but I feel like that is just so instantly recognisable.
Yeah, it really is. And you always get me Christmas presents with this on, which I love.
What is your favourite text of hers?
Oh, I'm such a one-trick pony. It's medical texts.
Yeah.
But having said that, there are some really, 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 really cool visions, especially in Scivias. Like this vision, she has her vision of Adam and Eve's fall, like this is Eve. This is meant to be Eve. Eve is just like a cloud of stars, and there's some like really beautiful cosmology in it. So she's a cloud of stars coming out of the side of Adam, and this is and in the vision it's more explicit that the stars in Eve are the same stars that are up here in the cosmos. So she like contains within her all the potential and all the goodness of the universe,
Oh my
which is just
God.
so pro Eve. There's a lot of pro Eve stuff, which I love.
Yeah.
So this vision also, which I think is maybe the third vision of Scivias, don't quote me on that. It's like one of the first 5 anyway. This is also an amazing one to read.
That's cool. So that sums up my finishes my questions. Thank you ever so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to me. Where can viewers find you, and where would you like them to go to follow you, etc.?
So my main platform is on TikTok. My handle is @MedievalLauren, and I have the same handle on Instagram and on Twitter. But TikTok is my main platform where I post. And people can also get in touch if they want to get in touch with me. I have my email address on my website, which is medievallauren.wordpress.com. So you can also find me on there.
Cool, thank you again. This has been lovely just to chat to you. Even if I never uploaded, this whole thing was actually a ruse just to talk to you for a bit.
I would like to once again thank the incomparable Lauren Cole for chatting with me, and I urge you all to check out her TikTok and other socials so you can follow both kind of her history content and her academic journey. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time.